Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Legal Pause podcast, which is a podcast series that explores the key issues and opportunities shaping the legal profession and also the charities and other organisations behind the profession supporting it. And each episode features a conversation between me, Nick Gallagher, I'm the CEO of the Solicitors Charity, and an invited guest. So far we've had guests from the Law Society, from Law Care, from the Mindful Business Charter, from the City of London Law Society. And you can catch up with those podcasts on the usual channels. But I'm very excited today because our guest is Stephanie Boyce. And Stephanie became the chair of the Solicitors Charity back in March, having joined us as a trustee last year. And we are delighted that she's done so. Now, you know that point at a conference when the keynote speaker gets up and the person begins to read the CV? Well, I've got that privilege today, and I am going to read it because there's a lot on this CV. Dr. Stephanie Boyce, CBE FKC, is a solicitor and former president of the Law Society of England and Wales. She holds a master's degree in public law and global governance from King's College London. Yay, King's College London, another alumnus here. Stephanie made history as the first person of colour to serve as president of the Law Society. In fact, she served 2 terms, which seems like unusual punishment. But at the Law Society, she championed diversity, access to justice and the rule of law. And throughout her career, she's been a passionate advocate for fairness, for inclusion, for social mobility and indeed for access to justice. She's also committed to supporting local organisations and schools, celebrating voluntary service and strengthening ties between civic institutions and the communities they serve. And a lot of that is in her home county of Buckinghamshire, where she was recently made a deputy lieutenant. As I mentioned, she became chair of the Solicitors Charity in March, but also just before that, she was awarded the CBE and the King's Honours List. And I'm going to start with a shallow question, Stephanie. What was it like when you got the letter from Buckingham Palace?
Gosh, well, firstly, can I say, Nick, thank you so much. It is an absolute privilege. I've done many a podcast, but this one is a special one. So what was it like to get that letter? Well, I'd always had impression that it would come in a very officious-looking brown envelope sort of thing. But it didn't. It came in a cream envelope, if I remember correctly. But what was even more so about it was the fact that it was hanging out the letterbox. I'd come home late during a storm. The postman couldn't get the letter through the door, and so left it hanging halfway out. So by the time I retrieved it, it was absolutely soaking. I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see the emblem at the back. So I just opened the door, threw it on the ground because it was wet, and came back to it a few moments later when I'd had the opportunity to put my glasses on and recognise that actually this wasn't the normal run-of-the-mill letters that I get. So what did it mean? It took me about an hour and a bit to open it because it started to dawn on me that, and I forget what it said, but it was, as I say, I knew it was something important. And it was around about that time as well that I'd heard from others, so it started to dawn on me that there was something important inside. It took me an hour and a half, deep breaths. Oh my goodness, I can't touch it. I can't look at it. Anyway, I eventually opened it, and that I read it so quickly. The only thing that really jumped out at me was CBE, and it was an emotional read because to be recognised in that way is just absolutely amazing. So. But what it meant to me also wasn't really about me. It was recognition for the services to, as you say, to legal profession, diversity, access to justice and so forth. But it was, and all of those things that I've dedicated my working life to. But what it really means is that actually, if it helps to open more doors for others to walk through, and it absolutely shines a spotlight on the work we are doing, because I didn't get here or the title just by myself. There were so many other people who helped me along the way. But if it means highlighting and spotlighting our work even more so, then I'll take an honour every single day.
Brilliant. And did you have any inkling that it might be coming, or was it a real surprise to you?
No, I mean, if I'm honest, because it came in the fourth year, what will be the fourth year of me leaving office. I remember friends used to joke, and it was a question I was asked lots, repeatedly. Why do you not have an honours yet? And so the more I kept being asked that question was the more I kept thinking, yeah, actually, why don't I have one? And so I started to look out I'd heard from other people about the process, but, round about that time that, it would, if you were going to be notified, it would come. And for the first couple of years, it didn't come. So I just gave up on the fact that I was going to get one. So it was, as I say, it took me an hour and a bit to open that. So it was a complete surprise, albeit the fact it was quite damp when I got it.
I'm just struck by the fact that you were beginning to think, perhaps something might not come, even though other people who've had the role of president have had honours. You've, in many ways, had quite a tough battle getting where you've got to. Why don't you tell us about how your career in law began? What were I'm going to say the push factors. We'll talk about push a little later, but what were the push factors? What were the pull factors? What attracted you to the profession?
I think for me, growing up, my parents, my grandparents came to this country, in search of faith, hope, and upward mobility. And I think as I grew up as a child, in that era where children should be seen but not heard, I heard the stories told and retold time and time again about the changes, the drastic changes in legislation, in immigration legislation, that would affect my family and the wider community, that in fact is still affecting us to this day, the ramifications of what we now know as the Windrush scandal. But what struck me the most was lots of people who came through our door. Our home was on a Sunday, there was like an open invitation. You came and you were fed and you were watered. But it was about lots of the injustices the different injustices people were facing as the legislation swiftly changed. People whose voice wasn't being heard, wasn't being recognised in a system that didn't always recognise them. And I sat there listening when I could, eavesdropping, thinking, this can't be right. And I became fascinated with that. And that stuck with me as I grew. And as I got older, and I started to learn about the law, our first prime minister, female prime minister, who was a barrister, as I started to learn about the law and I started to learn about politics and how the two intertwined and how actually I could one day lend my voice to that discourse. And so for me, it was that drive of making a difference and having those voices, speaking up for those whose voice had not always been heard.
And it takes a degree of confidence to do that and succeed. Did you always have confidence, or did you have to learn confidence?
I think, did I always have that? I was always a smart child, and I put that in inverted commas, because I was always quick on the, on the retort. But I was a very quiet child, and I know lots of people will be surprised by that. But at times, very quiet, very reserved. I was more of an observing what was going on around me. As we saw different things domestically and globally going on around the world. When we immigrated to America at age 12, and I was there walking around with a T-shirt, if Nelson Mandela's not free, placards at detentions, in black, dressed in black on Thursdays, mourning the world. And as people would ask me, who is Nelson Mandela? And I would just be like, oh my goodness, totally outraged by the lack of knowledge as I was in America, by the lack of the way that people could access advice, legal advice and representation, who got to access that advice. And I think that burning desire just grew, and I just knew that I wanted to make a difference. I didn't know how. And sometimes I still don't know how. I'm still trying to feel my way through. But for me, it's about leaving the world in a better place than I found it, and indeed leaving our profession in a better place than I found it.
Do you think your views would have shaped up in the same sort of way if you'd stayed in the UK rather than going to the US when you were 12? Or was that an extra push?
That was absolutely an extra push. I became aware of, by going to America, I became aware of the colour of my skin, if you like. I became aware of the differences and how people are treated because of the colour of their skin. And not so much because, of course, there were, as children, in this country, we were teased. I could see some of the injustices unfolding, but brought up in a household where we were told, to focus on the content of our character. And Britain was a different Britain then. We were a community on that council estate. We were a family. And so to be plucked into the world of military, because my stepfather was in the American Air Force, and to be plucked in from rural Buckinghamshire, and we all had a twang then, which has almost disappeared in Buckinghamshire and other counties, home counties. But to go to an American Air Force base, so the first time we'd live on a base, be educated on a base, everything happened on that base. But a little girl coming from rural Buckinghamshire being thrust into that world where those children had gone around the world. We were the same age, but they were wiser in so many ways that I had to grow up fast. I had to learn fast. And so absolutely that was that push. It was the catalyst.
Yeah, interesting. And I think I'm right in saying you came back to the UK to do, well, you did your legal education in the UK. Did you experience gatekeeping getting into the academic part of your career, getting your training, or did gatekeeping come later?
Well, I think it was probably always there. It's whether or not I recognised it or not. So for me, coming from a family where we didn't know any lawyers, if we did, certainly there weren't any in my family, there weren't any in my community. So not being able to have that social currency, that capital to draw on. But in terms of that gatekeeping, it was that knowledge. So, and of course, the internet wasn't as prolific then as it is now that you could just Google, who might I, or go on to social media and make contact with people, to do that real network. In fact, I didn't even know how to network. And that's why I'm passionate about people getting out and networking, because it does open doors. But for me, not having access to that meant that I had to feel my way by trial and error. And at times, I'm still feeling my way by trial and error. But certainly, I came back having graduated from high school in America. My American high school diploma was not recognised here at that time. I had to do a 2-year conversion, access to higher education, before I could get into university. And then again, I didn't have the financial resources to fund my dream of qualifying as a solicitor. So initially I wanted to be a barrister, but that was all out because I just would not be able to work for free. I needed an income to support me, to support myself. And so all of that, whether we recognise it or not, determines who gets in and who stays out of our profession. And that's why I have been such an advocate of the solicitor apprenticeship scheme, but also wanting to do things differently. And of course, as I say, recognising that there are still gatekeepers to this day in terms of who we bring into the profession, who gets promoted. The statistics bear out that if you are a certain demographic, come from a certain school, university, you are more likely to get ahead. But dare I say it, Nick, it's not just our profession. If we look at our politics, dare I say it, 19 of our last prime ministers, because we are, 14 have gone to Oxford, Andy Burnham, the latest, Cambridge, and 3 who didn't go to university. Callaghan, Brown went to, he went to University of Edinburgh, but Callaghan, Churchill and Major didn't go to university. That says something.
There's a really interesting conversation about the current cabinet, though, isn't there? Because I understand that there are more Oxbridge educated people in this cabinet than any previous cabinet or for a very long time. The difference, I guess, is that more of those are socially mobile people. But have we just got a different kind of gatekeeping now?
Well, and this is the concern, and this is one of the things that I speak lots about in terms of meritocracy, in terms of merit. I'm all in favour of merit, because what we've heard is a shift from, we've shifted from equal opportunity, if you like, to I'm going to appoint on merit, which, of course, I have no objection to. The difficulty is that when merit starts to look like mirror images of other people who are getting ahead, that's where the difficulty comes in for me. And so if it is being distributed equitably, no problem. But what we're seeing is exactly what you said, is that actually it's a different sort of gatekeeping.
I guess when diversity becomes not diversity because everybody looks the same, just different from their predecessors. Just thinking though about then the start of your working career, I'm interested that you went in-house. You were in-house counsel. You were a legal advisor in regulators, professional associations. Why did you go in-house? What was it? Why did you think that played to your particular strengths, or was it one of those accidents of careers?
Well, I tell you what it was, Nick. I had been made redundant twice in as many years in private practice. That was at a time where we were seeing the reduction in public funding to legal aid. There was, lots of things going on for high street smaller firms. And so I remember that at the time, conveyancing was the boom of the day. I didn't want to be a conveyancer. I didn't want to be a family law practitioner. I'd been scared off of that. I wanted to be a litigator. But as I say, as funding was being withdrawn, the practicality, the reality of that was that actually there wasn't a position for me. And I was becoming tired of being made redundant. So I remember I had approached a recruiter and I said, I want to get into the city. She told me I'd never been in the city. I hadn't trained in the city. I hadn't worked in the city. Therefore, there was no place for me in the city. But I persisted, and that is, Nick, dare I say it, the resilience in me underpinned by the push framework, to persevere and keep going, even when people tell me differently. But I persevered, and I got my first job in the city at the General Counsel of the Bar. And so that was my first taste of in-house, and I loved it so much. I kept going until I left the in-house practice arena in, I think, 2017 or thereabouts, 2015, thereabouts.
Yeah. I hadn't realised we had that in common, Stephanie. I was also made redundant twice relatively early in my strange career, and it really does focus the mind, and you just do have to keep persevering and not lose your nerve. But of course we see that with clients coming to the charity now, that increasingly we're seeing people who've been made redundant there are real difficulties or have lost their job in some way, and that's becoming a bigger part of our work, help to those people. So it's something that many people experience.
Absolutely, Nick. I don't know about your situation, but certainly, through my situation, what I had was time. There was a consultancy process and last in, first out sort of thing. But increasingly what we're seeing now is that actually people are not given much time. That sometimes it is just, a couple of hours notice, or where we have had individuals where firms have perhaps gone out of business, closed, without notice, and so that presents pressures for individuals as well, and we're finding that by those who are coming to us for help.
Absolutely right, and you mentioned firms that have gone out of business recently. We've had a few examples of that, and we have been able to help in those cases. So just a message to anybody listening: if you do find yourself in a situation where you've lost your job, you're feeling the stresses and strains, do please think about getting in touch with us. We'd love to help if we can. But let me move on a little bit, if I may, Stephanie. I want to talk about your time with the Law Society, and that wasn't exactly an easy journey, was it? And I know that you joined council, and you were chair of one of the committees there. But I think you had 4 attempts to become president.
Yeah, 4 attempts. Yeah, 4 attempts. And I think, that for me underpins that resilience that I spoke about earlier, that tenacity to keep going, but appreciating that not everyone has that in them to keep going in the face of, where some people said to me, go home and rest, stop embarrassing yourself. It's never going to happen. But for me, it was that I decided quietly, and my belief was that I had something different to offer. And how amazing would it be when I got there? And that's the reason why I stood, and I stood again and again and again, because, and it's not because the rejections didn't sting. They absolutely did. But in a way, that sting, I'd find a spot in my house and I would just cry and cry, but which was quite cathartic at the time, because it gave me that opportunity to reflect, to consider, reconsider my offering and to perfect it. But also, for me, it wasn't that drive from personal ambition wanting to become president, because when people said, how do we know you're not doing this for your CV? Well, I didn't appreciate what I was being asked or told, because I hadn't done it before. I hadn't really been au fait with people up past presidents who had been presidents and what that had done for them. But what I knew was that I wanted to get there to make a difference. I wanted the presidency to be different, the president to be approachable, and not in the sense that other presidents haven't been approachable, but for me, as a young girl growing up in Buckinghamshire, if I had been able to communicate with the president of the Law Society, wow, the difference it would have made.
You were the leader of the profession, a leader of the profession. Let's say the leader of the profession. What did you learn about leadership from being in that role?
Well, goodness, I had to learn very quickly because I came to the role earlier than expected. I came to the role in March 2021 instead of October 2021. I came to it during a period of turbulence in our nation's history. I think it's fair to say the back end of Brexit, a pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the withdrawal in Afghanistan, all of those things, unprecedented. And so I had to learn very quickly, build relationships very quickly, be very politically astute with all the characters that were there. But I also I couldn't assume that I knew what the profession needed. I had to listen, undertake a listening exercise. And I had to have that tenacity to and that staying power, because as you said, 2 terms, well, just slightly under 2 terms, but I would be the longest serving president doing 19 months instead of the usual 12 months. But that tenacity to keep going and learning and being flexible and adaptable, because none of us, for most of us, we hadn't been in a pandemic. We hadn't done a Brexit before. All of those things. We hadn't had a war in Europe this close to home for a long time. And all of those things, while keeping the profession and the wheels of justice turning, was something that we had to learn very quickly. But it was about listening. It was about not being assuming. And I had to grow as a leader. I'm still growing as a leader.
Just thinking about the challenges of becoming president, the challenges of work, the various gatekeepers. You just said that, you'd go home and you'd have a cathartic cry, and I'm sure many of us have had one of those in our careers, and they are wonderfully cathartic. But they still are the result of sadness, of disappointment. With all of that that's gone on, how do you avoid bitterness?
I'd like to think, Nick, that, some of the best lessons that I have learned have come through some of those setbacks. And I absolutely believe that, I had a good friend a long time ago tell me that, what doesn't kill us is going to make us stronger. And absolutely, if it was meant for me, it would happen. And so for me, I took the opportunity, as I say, to learn from some of those setbacks, But I'm very much, and I know in a world that we increasingly are in, it is very difficult to maintain that positive mindset, to keep focused, and not allow things to drag you down. And of course, there are moments like that where I have to take a deep breath and I have to kind of, recalibrate and remember, where I'm going, where I've been. But I absolutely am a subscriber to that whole growth mindset, that positive mindset. And it's my absolute belief in a life of service. I absolutely believe in a life of service, that I'm here to help, to make a world a positive difference. And as I say, or I used to say, before I became president, I used to say, if I could make a difference to one person, I would go quietly. But now being able to see that actually the difference that can be made in that remarkable platform I was given not given as president, I had to certainly develop it and promote it, but not allowing that just to go by the wayside once I ceased being president, but to turn that into lots of amazing things that other people could, or lots of people could walk through those doors and benefit from.
And I mean, you've got, like many solicitors, you've got lots of experience of difficulties and challenges that you've had to face, and we see that with our clients at the charity day in, day out. You're known, or have been known, very much around inclusion, social mobility, breaking down barriers, and now, much to our delight, you become our chair, but we're about well-being. How does well-being connect to what you've been doing before?
Absolutely. So, a couple of things. So when I was president, part of my presidential year was about mental health and well-being. And in fact, my not been done before was that I had 3 presidential charities that culminated in a presidential gala. And I'm sure some of the listeners perhaps were in that room on that occasion. But Law Care, of course, as we know, as the mental health and wellbeing charity of the legal profession, was one of the recipients of one of my charities. So was the Sutton Trust, and so was Access to Justice Foundation. And the culmination of the presidential gala dinner raised £66,000 for those 3 charities. And there are still occasions where I might do some work and people might want to make a donation, and I direct them to those 3 charities. But the other thing is, having, as you said, spent most of my professional life working about trying to remove the gatekeepers, break down the barriers to entry into our profession, once we got people in, and I've heard this on so many occasions, that actually, what do we then do to support them to sustain and thrive in our profession? And so for me, it felt like a natural progression that, having done so much work getting people in, that it's not just enough just to not help people be sustained in our profession and thrive in our profession. So for me, it felt like a natural transition.
And I mean, I've shared these figures with you before, Stephanie, but it's a concern to me and to the charity about how people are supported to stay in the profession, not least the issue of ethnicity. So, I think it's 3% of solicitors are black, but consistently a much higher proportion of the people who come to us for help are black. In 2025, of the new people who came to us, it was 15%. Now, that feels to me as though we're not getting something right. I don't know quite what that is, and we're doing everything we can to try to help people pick up the pieces and stay in the profession. But that is a discrepancy that I find worrying.
Absolutely, Nick. And, the thing about it is, of course, we've talked about gatekeeping. Of course, we know the challenges, as I say, of getting into our profession and thriving in our profession. We know the statistics that bear out as to who gets ahead in our profession. And unfortunately, and I include the judiciary in that, because we have seen a stagnation of black judges or those who get into the judiciary and promoted into the judiciary. That figure has not moved much since 2014. So we as a profession, again, have to ask ourselves what is going on, and what should we be doing? Now, what we know is, and again, it goes back to the point around initiatives that have been put together to help certain demographics get ahead. Unfortunately, initiatives that have been tested by the courts, or will be tested by the courts, and initiatives that have been dismantled because of the current geopolitical environment we find ourselves in, which is absolutely unfortunate. Now, if we as a profession could equalise the playing field ourselves, dare I say it, there would be no need for various initiatives. But that is not the case. We are still a profession that favours a certain demographic, a certain individual entrant who has a certain accent, a certain schooling, and the list goes on. And so we as a profession have to ask ourselves, are we being true to are we being true to justice, in eradicating that unfairness, treating people equally and the same? And of course, as you say, the statistics tell us absolutely differently. And I think one of the things, Nick, I think we need to do is, I think we need to absolutely highlight those statistics a bit more to the profession, because it is absolutely worrying that we are seeing more and more, as you say, black professionals coming to us who find themselves in either financial difficulty, or they're finding themselves in mental and physical distress. That's us. That is on all of us as members of the profession. And I think we need to call that out a bit more.
Yeah, I agree totally. And you just very neatly there outlined some of the support that the charity provides and when it provides it. We have moved a long way from the old poverty alleviation charity that we were for many years, for well over a century. And our focus is on well-being, and I've spoken before about our 4 pillars of well-being, about mental well-being, physical, professional and financial well-being. But what developments would you like to see in the way that the Solicitors Charity improves well-being in the sector?
I mean, my vision for the charity is that we are the go-to charity when it comes to the profession. And of course, we are, by the very nature of our title, our name, the charity, the Solicitors Charity. But, our reach extends far more so than that. We are a funder of law care, which of course straddles the whole of the legal profession. And of course, we have a wealth of information that we can signpost individuals. So it doesn't mean if somebody comes to us who is not a solicitor, we are just not going to help. We are going to, of course, signpost them. But what I would like to see for our charity is that we are the number one charity to go to. We are the charity of the solicitor's profession. So what it means is we need to increase that visibility. We need to increase that reach, because we recognise that there are still a lot of people who do not know about us, who do not know about the support that we can provide. And given the current economic climate that we find ourselves in, and not just economics, but also the current geopolitical climate we find ourselves in, we know that there are individuals out there who are struggling, and we can help, but they might not know about us. So how we can extend our reach and our profile to ensure that anyone solicitor and their dependents who need our help can access that help. But dare I say it, Nick, I have to caveat that with our funding and the way that we are funded. We are funded by the profession, for the profession, but equally, as I say, our reach indirectly does extend to the whole profession. And as I say, we don't turn individuals away, not just because they're a solicitor. We can signpost them to other organisations. But it does mean that the profession needs to support us and support the work that we are doing. And for anyone listening, If you would like to find out more information about what we do, how you can support us, then please do take a look at our website, or indeed drop me, or indeed you, Nick, a line. And we're quite happy to have a conversation.
And just to build on that as well, Stephanie, we are funded by the profession, but not in any formal way. People think, oh, we must get funding from one of the bodies, or is there a levy or something? There isn't. We are funded by the profession because we have kind donors, both firms and individuals, but also because of the receipt of unclaimed client balances from firms. So we're working hard to diversify the way that we are supported, but I can only echo what you say. Yes, do please get in touch, because we do need your support. Absolutely. Just going back to the individuals, to solicitors who are going through difficult times, because that's why we're here. There's no point us doing anything if we're not helping individuals. What would you say to someone who's reluctant to come forward and ask for help? What would you do to encourage them?
What I would do to encourage anyone who is reluctant to come forward to help, who might be listening to this podcast, is please reach out. We're non-judgmental. We don't take any view or in respect of, it's not our job to judge, to have an opinion as to your circumstances or anything like that. We will provide you with impartial advice and assistance where we can. And if we can't, then certainly we will signpost you to relevant partners that we have partnered with who might be able to assist. But, there is an old proverb that says a problem shared, or I think I've got that completely wrong, but...
that is a problem halved.
Oh, there you go. And so it does pay. And that is part of, dare I say it, Nick, that is part of some of our... some of the small steps that we can do in terms of mental health and well-being is to start talking and sharing about that. And as I say, in a non-judgmental, impartial way, that the charity, our staff, can do that. So please do come forward and ask and seek out the help that we can provide.
And just to emphasise that, we do ask people who've been to us for help if we've made a difference. And I'm delighted to say that the vast majority of people say that we really do help. But interestingly, within that, those people who've come to us where we've not necessarily been able to make an award or refer for specific expert help, people are still saying to us, the fact I had a conversation with your case managers made all the difference. For many people, it's the first time they've been able to talk about their issues. They're holding it in. They don't want to talk to friends or family. Perhaps they don't have a family. They don't want to talk to their employers. So it does make a difference talking to people. And I share your exaltation that people come to us and ask for help. Stephanie, we've been talking for a good time now. It's a delight, as always, to do so. Thank you for joining us today. I and the rest of the charity are really looking forward to our work with you over your term as chair. I think it's going to be exciting times. But for everybody listening, just remember the 4 R's that I talk about. The first one is reach out, as Stephanie said. Do reach out to us for help. It's okay to ask. Talk to colleagues, talk to that trusted friend, but come to us as well if we can help. Remember RCBs, those unclaimed balances. They're really vital for our funding. Register. Go to our website and register for regular updates so that you know what's happening in the world of well-being and specifically in the charity. But also, just play your part on social media, react to our messages on LinkedIn, help build awareness by spreading the word and help tell the stories that we're telling of the good work that we're doing. But Stephanie, thank you. It's been a joy. And to everybody else, we'll see you in the next podcast. Do send your ideas and questions in. We'd love to have them.